The sponsor of Liftoff with Keith is the one and only CompassStrategicAdvisors.com, an experienced partner to help you navigate everything from cap tables to stock option and compensation plans and all types of backroom and marketing services. There is no better friend to the startup CEO than Compass. Check them out at CompassStrategicAdvisors.com. Okay, so here's the question. How do you scale a company without scaling the bureaucracy that eventually kills the entrepreneurial behavior that made the company successful in the first place? If you really think about that, it's a fundamental question. It exists with almost every company I've met with. And I was talking to my guest today about how we've done 150 of these, and they're all unique, but they all fall into certain categories too. Today's guest has more than 35 years on both the entrepreneurial side, a CEO, an investor, an operating executive, and business school faculty member. Hunter Hastings is the co-author of Venture Mode: Escape the Administration Trap by Finding and Unleashing Entrepreneurial Leaders. His central argument is provocative. Growth doesn't kill startups, management does. And Hunter, we're going to get into some of that stuff, but it's interesting, this idea of venture mode and administrative trap really catch my eye because I have an intuitive sense what you're talking about, but I want to hear exactly what you're talking about. So, Hunter, welcome to Liftoff and share with me what exactly is the administration trap.
Well, thank you. It's very nice to be here, Keith. And in the book, which I co-wrote with Mark Packard, who's a professor teaching entrepreneurship and business at Florida Atlantic University, so you get the research side and the practical side from the two authors. And administration mode we've identified as the way that companies have been run for a long, long time in America and everywhere else in the West. And it's about internal control. It's when they get to a certain size, they have real coordination problems, and the instinct is to add a layer of management. And then it gets more complicated, and so you add another layer of management. And then you add another layer to supervise the managers. Then you add a compliance layer to make sure that the managers are doing what they should. And then you add the KPIs and the metrics and the reporting to make sure that the compliance is the way you want it to be. And what happens in the end is you're focused on self-management, internal management, and you forget the customer. So venture mode is the opposite. It's starting with the customer. It's got a different purpose for the firm, which was improve people's lives, to make their lives better, to enable them. And when you do that successfully, you get revenue, you get profit. Profit is the signal from the marketplace that you're doing a good job for the customer. It's not the purpose of the business. And when you start focusing on profit, you can start to make bad decisions. You might lower a cost because it increases your margin, but it reduces the quality of the customer experience. You might try and cut the number of headcount because headcount is a cost. And so you start to make those decisions in administration mode. In venture mode, you don't do that. It's relentless pursuit of new value for the customer by everybody in the business and removing all the potential barriers to letting them do that.
So I love that. How does that start to take shape then? Is that not hiring too many managers, or what do you do organizationally that facilitates that that energy around venture mode?
So there's two ways to think about this, I think, Keith. If you look at some new companies, they have built an organization that doesn't suffer from those problems. They've never added the management. One of the companies in the book is a Chinese company called Handu, Handu, and it's a multi-billion-dollar corporation. It runs with thousands of front-end e-commerce stations. They're staffed by typically 3 people: a marketing person, a technology person, and a procurement person. They run experiments all the time, just like e-commerce. They're offering things, they're seeing what people will buy. There's thousands of those. That data is fed back into a software layer in the middle of the company. There's no middle management. The software layer relates to the back end, produce more of this, produce less of that, and then it ships that information back to the front end. So you've got this closed loop of continuous improvement without any middle management. So that says it's possible. You look at NVIDIA under Jensen Huang. He famously has I think at the last count, 62 direct reports.
I love
He
that. Yeah.
he doesn't want anybody in between him and the front lines. He wants emails from everybody in the company, which he reads and responds to. Elon Musk famously wants to talk directly to the engineers because they're the ones with the knowledge. So there's a number of modern companies that have created this new organization. The question now is, can you get out of administration mode when you're locked into it? It's very hard. You got to dig up the ground you're standing on, so that's pretty tough. And it's removal of barriers. It's identifying the barriers, the bureaucratic and administrative barriers, stripping them away. We found that the best way to do it is to create a pirate ship, to find people in your organization who are entrepreneurial leaders. They're maybe dissatisfied, they're grumpy, the kind of people that don't fit the administrative mode, and maybe set up a pilot, a new company, a new venture, a new project, a new unit, and let them run their business that way. And then it will be contagious. Everybody else in the company will want that kind of approach. So it's really, really hard for the big corporation, Keith. And that's why they don't live forever, right?
I
They're
love the
typically.
point of both unbundling and bundling into an organization as you grow.
Mhm.
So the idea of about direct reports and fewer documents, I guess. But what is the right balance, right? I mean, that's ultimately the question. In meetings, approvals, dashboards, how many people should manage how many people, you know? What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I'm pretty suspicious of the word balance. I know how you're thinking of using it, but it comes from a concept in economics called equilibrium, that markets eventually get to equilibrium between supply and demand. Well, they don't. They're constantly churning and swirling, and they're in constant turbulence, which is how new ideas come out and new things happen. And so I think it's the turbulence and the innovation and the uncertainty that you want. You want to cultivate that. One of the examples also in the book, Keith, is a Chinese company called Haier, which is it's a $30 billion company. And the way they solved the problem was to break the company up into what they call micro enterprises. There are thousands of them. And the way they coordinated is each micro enterprise serves consumers, and they call it closeness to the consumer. They're always figuring out what the consumer wants, developing new products and responding that way. When they get to a certain size, they just form another micro enterprise. So they never get bigger than about 75 or 80 people. Within those micro enterprises, there's a marketing micro enterprise, which will help the production micro enterprise. There's an accounting micro enterprise. Everybody's got a P&L. Everybody is making a profit. And so there are just many ways to get to the balance, as you call it, without layers of management.
What is the common mistake you hear when you're brought in to see a company? I'm curious, how do you go in and start? What are the questions you start to look at?
Well, it often is exhibited by the metrics. What are you trying to achieve? What are your KPIs? And when they're numerical, they're about internal ratios. You know, when you think of things like profit margins and return on invested capital,
Yep.
they're the company comparing it with itself. And what you need to look for is metrics and windows that look at the customer. What's the customer condition? And even there, you've got to be a little bit imaginative. So customer retention, again, that's a ratio, you know, how many stayed, how many left. But customer satisfaction and customer reaching out to look for new products because they're so happy with the old products, those are the kinds of things that you're trying to look for. So they're qualitative more than they're quantitative. That's a really hard thing for corporations brought up in administration mode because it's all about numbers. So you look for whether there's a feeling, an ability to use qualitative data about customers and how they feel.
Your thinking is sort of rooted in Austrian economics and the idea of consumer sovereignty. The value is ultimately determined by the customer. Is that always true? Is the customer always right? What do you look for in terms of that time when you adopt the feedback and reject the customer feedback?
Well, the customer is always right is not the expression I like to use, Keith. The customer is the boss, and they have the final verdict. And so whatever you offer to them, it's their verdict that counts. And so that's the constant rule. Yes, you never stop from that being the rule. But it can be used in big corporations. I started life at Procter and Gamble, and I was in the marketing department, and my customer was mom. And we thought about mom all the time, about what kind of washing up liquid and detergent and so on that she wanted. She was the boss. And if she didn't like the aroma, then we found a new aroma that she would like. If she didn't think her clothes were getting clean enough, we made it better cleaning. And so I learned that right at the beginning from a big corporation. Your customer, in that case, was mom. Mom's the boss.
Yeah.
And that's the rule that you always follow.
Did you ever bump into Scott Cook at your P&G days? He's the founder of Intuit and Quicken.
Yeah, I never bumped into him, but he's typical of the P&G graduate. You know, he had a
Yeah.
great insight at Intuit, as I'm sure you know, and they were adding more and more kinds of capabilities to their software to help people do accounting. But he had the insight, people don't want to do accounting. They want to be relieved of accounting. So don't give me all these bells and whistles, just make it easy and convenient. That's a great example of the customer being the boss.
Customer centric. But in practice, they often build what the product team wants. And they go out and they sell. And so I guess what's genuine value creation actually look like?
That I like the story that Jensen Wang tells about that, Keith. And you know, when they first built their first game board at NVIDIA, they were in the video game business and had all the bells and whistles, and it failed in the marketplace. And it failed for reasons like backward compatibility. People couldn't use their old consoles, and it didn't have good connections to the audio. And so they got lousy audio. And Jensen said after that, I learned a big lesson then. I built what the engineers want to build. I didn't build what the market wanted, meaning the customer. And so you have that mentality all the time. What is the market? What's the customer want? And so you're constantly doing that. You can't have them tell you what they want. That's the famous Steve Jobs quote that they only know what they want when you show it to them. So you've
Yeah.
got to use this empathy, this ability to get inside their heads and say, how
Hmm.
would their lives be better and how can I improve their lives in the future? It's imagination, it's intuition. So there's no processes for it. It's just state of mind. And then lots and lots of learning through experimentation. We believe that action rather than strategy is the right way to go. Act,
Oh,
do something, learn, repeat.
that totally resonates with me too. And not my own life as an entrepreneur or founder, but as my consulting hat on, working with dozens of companies the last few years, and the people that wait for it to happen versus the people that go make it happen.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So on that note, the idea of finding entrepreneurial leaders, the subtitle of your book is about finding and unleashing the
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurial leader. How does a CEO identify those leaders within a company? And once you find them, what do most companies do accidentally that potentially suffocates them?
Leadership is a controversial subject, as I'm sure you've discussed on your many podcasts, Keith.
Yep.
And the way it's taught in business school, it's about authority, it's about charisma. You're smarter than others, and you can lead them, which means you've got to have followers. Entrepreneurial leaders means the ones who are willing to try something different, the ones who learn by experiment. So, as I mentioned earlier, they're often kind of rebellious. They'd rather try something else, but they're the ones you want in your best projects or your most adventurous projects. They're the ones who step up to the plate and say, I'd like to do that. Instead of being promoted to vice president, I'd rather be a director over here running this new project. And it's a mindset, it's an attitude, and you look for that as opposed to the authority of leadership. It's a psychological approach in many ways. We call it the mindset. So you've got to be able to detect that mindset.
You went right into my next question, which was, I don't know why, but I had this feeling like you were going to be part of that quote MBA mindset, but you're kind of not. You're pretty tough on that. Um, right? So I don't know, is there a problem with the MBA mindset or the way people apply that education once they enter a company?
Well, we have a number of points in the book about that Keith. And remember, my partner, Mark
Okay,
Packard,
I'll read. I've got to
teaches,
read the book now.
yeah, he teaches MBA, so he knows
Yes.
wherever he speaks. The MBAs teach things for the old businesses, not the new businesses. And they teach things you can pass exams on. So like accounting and scenario
Uh-huh.
planning and
Okay.
financials and things like that. But everything we've talked about is intuition, imagination, creativity, experimentation. And so the MBA mindset of control, we think, is the wrong one. We put forward an idea we called the MBE. So the E would be enterprise or entrepreneurship. And that would be two things: learn the principles, the kinds of principles I've talked about, which is the customer's the boss. What they say is valuable is what leads the way. So we call it evaluation. And it's subjective. It's what they think. Like Jensen said, I could give them this great engineered game board, and they didn't want it subjectively because it didn't give them a good experience. So you got to learn that value, that subjective value, and then go get some experience. So in our MBE, we would have students go and take a kind of internship or apprenticeship, perhaps, at a corporation, a sponsoring corporation, and they'd learn to do real projects in real time with real people and real resources, and they'll learn through experience. And let me just make a point about that, and that is MBAs think that their customer is, or the universities that teach MBAs, their customer is the student, or maybe the student's parents. But in fact, it should be the hiring corporation. So when we talk about the MBE, we want the hiring corporation to be our customer. They want to buy the students that we're turning out in the MBE. They're going to test them in the apprenticeship, and they'll make the deal if one is good. So we think universities have the wrong customer in mind, which is one of the principles of venture mode. Know your customer.
Well, we know we know those programs have to evolve, and I think most of them get it to a certain point. Another issue or event that's having us rethink speed and evolution in a way is this AI era question, right? In this day and age, we're hearing about these really small teams building companies moving very fast. Even the largest companies are evolving at breakneck speed. And a lot of teams, you're staggered by how small they are and yet how much revenue they're producing, and how much technology they're sharing with the market. So does AI make venture mode easier, or does it make the administrative trap even more dangerous?
I think AI doesn't change the venture mode concept, it accelerates it.
Mm,
So exactly as you said, Keith, you can run more experiments more quickly and get the patterns of the data back and refeed it back into more experiments. It does accelerate. It has more knowledge because it can access all the world's knowledge, right? It's been trained on the internet.
right.
Um, and what you find in companies, some of them use AI to automate processes and bureaucracy, and they worry about the cost of tokens, and so they reduce the cost of headcount. And that's not the way to use AI, I don't think. The way to use AI is in venture mode, thinking up new ideas. Now, AI doesn't have the imagination, it doesn't have the human emotional commitment that's required for entrepreneurship, but it
True.
can speed up those experiments and those inquiries. It can build a prototype faster. It can test the prototype faster. So you just accelerate the process. And you look at some of these companies now that are growing. If you look at the S&P 500, I think the top five are growing at 10 times the rate of the other 495. So speed is an advantage there. And we, in the administration mode, we tend to be a little bit scared of speed, right? How can you be accurate and perfect when you're going so fast? But in fact, that's not what you do in venture mode. You keep learning and trying. We hate the term fail fast because it's not failing. It's experimenting and learning at an
Yeah.
accelerated pace. So AI is going to help economic growth and firm growth tremendously.
So in the scenario where there's a five-person team doing what it used to be a 50-person team, what happens to the traditional management model?
Well, I think we eliminate, quote, managers, unquote. So management is, as I said, this form of internal control. And if you have a good career, get promoted to a higher and higher level of management, that's going to go away. The number of entrepreneurs is going to increase
Yeah.
inside the firm, running projects, doing experiments, doing coordination. Everybody in the firm can have an entrepreneurial role because it's about creating value. And I don't think there'll be fewer roles, there'll be more and more of them because this accelerating process just reveals more and more opportunities to create new value. So I'm really excited about the future. I think it'd be great. We'll lose a lot of managers and we'll gain a lot of entrepreneurs.
But the underlying point, though, is productivity at the individual level.
Yeah, in the book, we have a calculation. It's a little bit rough, but since the end of the Second World War, the rate of productivity growth in the US has been about half of what it could be if you didn't have the administrative mode sclerosis. Now it's a rough number, but there are various academics who've done that research and come up with a similar number. But in the individual firm, as you said, you can increase productivity growth tremendously through acceleration and focus on value creation. So yeah, we think productivity growth in the US could be double or triple what it is now easily.
Interesting. So you've had a couple different roles as an entrepreneur, a CEO, a senior operating exec, and always fun to be in the catbird seat as a VC or venture
Mm-hmm.
investor. Which one taught you the most about what actually enables that company growth trajectory? Where
Well,
did you pick that? Yeah.
yeah, I've had the reinforcement about the customer a couple of times, Keith, positively and negatively.
Hmm.
So one of the businesses I started was a global consulting company about building global brands back in the day when they weren't quite as positive or usual as they are now. They were just growing, and we developed some good principles for growing global brands in local countries. So how do you adapt the global brand to the local country? That was very successful because our customer really wanted it. The collaboration with the customer was great. We had great results. So it was about getting the right customer for the right service. Another technology company that I was hired to be the CEO as a restart, as they call it in Silicon Valley. It had lost its way. And the reason was we didn't get the customer right. So the technology was fabulous. It was in the marketing and media space to help with what we used to call back then digital assets, digitizing what had been on film and what had been in print and so on. And the technology was terrific, but the customer was really concerned about things like storage and security and the quality that they were used to with film. Would it be the same in digital? Back in the early days of digital media. And so we never got that assurance quite right. And so the company didn't grow as fast as it could have done. So those are both reinforcing about the customer as the boss, negatively and positively. I've done both.
Sometimes you learn the most during those down times and those
That's right.
reshuffles and stuff.
Yeah, and
So
you
what
don't
do
get your
you
time back, I find these are.
so what did you believe early in your career that you no longer believe today?
Well, we used to think that the corporation was persistent and an institution that pillars up society, and the right thing to do is have a career, and to have a career, you've got to persistently follow the rules of the corporation, and you're a bit of a renegade if you don't do that, and you'll never be successful. All of those institutional rules. Well, clearly that's not the case now, and we've got to find new forms of coordination. I mean, a lot of your questions, I would put them in the category of coordinations, and we really don't know how that works. There's a whole theory around systems thinking now that we don't really know how systems work because there's no cause and effect. You can't isolate one cause and get an effect. There's so many variable changes interacting with each other. It's global, it's digital, and you just can't identify one cause and one effect and use that to go forward. So you just got to learn how the system works, how it evolves, and get into the space where it evolved where you want it to.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to go for the slight contrarian close here, Hunter, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
I've asked you a bunch of questions and you've been right on point following, um, this theme. But what are founders doing today that you just simply bristle? You just say, this is just not the right way to go. What are some of those signals that you see or things that you hear?
Well, I think there are two. One is the devotion to technology and improving the technology, and what you said earlier about new features. And the way to think about technology, it's not economics, it's not business. It evolves on its own, which is a wonderful thing. But Matt Ridley in his book talked about tinkerers. Your technology advances through tinkering. It's just recombining things in new ways, in great new ways that
Right.
creates breakthroughs. You've got to think about business. How is the customer going to use it? And when I hear things like TAM, total addressable market, that's numbers, that's calculations, that's spreadsheets. That's not thinking about a customer and then getting it right for that customer and then scaling up from that customer. So I just want to hear founders think more and more about who's the customer, who's the market with a small m as opposed to a TAM, and really think that way. The technology will be the technology. It will evolve, and you can be a really smart founder and use it in different ways, but you've got to think about the customer. I
Yeah. I mean, that's a brilliant place to end, but I'm not going to let you go yet. I got a couple more minutes. So I want to
Yeah.
ask, we touched on a bunch of themes, but I wonder if you still are holding on to some other thought or two that you can share with a founder who's listening today. They're growing fast. They have questions about their hiring plan, as well as their product roadmap, as well as their go-to-market and all that stuff. But what's the one thing you'd like to tell them to protect at all costs?
Well, if you think about the elements that are going to be successful for a new company, you've got the market and you've got technology and you've got the team. And you already mentioned it. Building the right team, the best balanced team, the team that can do marketing as well as product and can do the accelerated learning that we talked about and work together and be fast without being abrasive. That's really, really hard to do. So
Hmm.
spend a lot of time, at least initially, on hiring your team. Do it personally. Don't let somebody else do it for you. And make sure it's the mindset, it's the psychology, the ability to get along together, the sparks that fly and creative magic, as opposed to anything on a resume, including an MBA, but lots of other things. Just build your team very, very carefully with the right people. Really, really hard to do, but it pays back the time that you spend on it.
Yeah, Hunter, I live in the middle of Silicon Valley, so we always talk about technology and product. It is the tidal wave of conversation,
Mhm.
but I do hear more and more people talking about creating that right culture and creating that right team.
Yeah.
So maybe there's a silver lining in this, but I think it all works to benefit building the company the right way.
Yeah, there's an interesting trend now in the Valley, since you mentioned it, which is they call it the FDE, the forward deployed engineer. That's an innovation. It's an organizational innovation. And it means that you hire somebody who can go into the customer, be like the customer, right? Becomes part of the customer's team instead of the firm's team, solves the problem with their perspective in mind and their environment in mind and their people in mind, and really helps adoption. They may never come back to your company, and they love it so much in the place they're deployed that
Right.
that's where that becomes their home. But that's a really nice innovation by Silicon Valley, I think. And I wouldn't call it the forward deployed engineer, but it's the customer's partner. And I applaud that. I think that's a good indication that Silicon Valley is thinking about the customer more than ever before.
Well, that's a good point, is Eddie, I guess, to drop it, Hunter. Were you positive notes for the valley and the future, and another good reason to go out and pick up venture mode, escape the administration trap by finding and unleashing entrepreneurial leaders. It's that's a gem. Thanks for contributing that and for joining us here on Liftoff, Hunter. Any final?
No, no, I'd love people to buy the book and love to get comments. So you can find the book at venturemode.biz.biz. And you can find me at hunterhastings.com. I'd love for you to get in touch.
Thank you so much for your time and your sharing.
Good, Keith. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure.